All right, welcome, welcome. Tonight we are here to talk about polyamory, a 101 introductory level into the topic. So, first, starting out, who am I? Who is Miss Cass? My legal name is Cassandra Jones. I am a master's of public health professional. I use she, her pronouns. I am right now working on becoming a mental health clinical counselor and a sex therapist. So I'm transitioning away from mental health, public health a little bit towards mental health and sexual health. Um, I have been a pansexual kinky leather woman for a long time. I have been what I call concentric circles style poly for 10 years. That's my term because hierarchical just didn't quite fit because that was just too hierarchical. Um, and I like to respect the fluidity between levels or circles. Um, and that's kind of how I like to just describe my style. Um, if you're interested in looking at my other classes, I have some options on YouTube as well as I do some stuff with my mental health support group in San Antonio that is for specifically for crazy kinksters. And we do a couple different topics. Most recently, we've been talking about attachment and trauma um, and mental health disorders. So, today, what are we going to be covering? We are going to be covering the different types of poly out there, what is available in the world, and what the different definitions are for different people for those different labels of polyamory. And everyone has their own specific definitions, just like I mentioned my own unique definition of concentric circle style. Um, we're going to also look at the motivations for why people get into polyamory because that's just as varied as the types of polyamory out there, probably even more so varied, I think. We're going to look at what are relationship agreements. And so, how people decide and agree and negotiate to things within relationships. We're going to talk about jealousy. What is jealousy and why do people deal with it and is it a bad thing? Like, and yes, poly people do get jealous. um, we're also going to look a little bit at safe sex and emotional health practices within polyamory, and that will kind of feed right into talking about some of the myths that people have about polyamory out there. And I think it's important to talk about the myths just a little bit, especially for the people who might view this recording on YouTube later on. And they might have a few more myths in their mind that we need to talk about. Alrighty, so what is polyamory? Um, Most traditionally, you see the combination of the Greek and the Latin terms for many and love. The Oxford Dictionary says the practice of engaging in multiple romantic and typically sexual relationships with the consent of all people involved. And then Psychology Today has a very similar definition: the practice of having multiple intimate relationships, whether sexual or just romantic, with the full knowledge of consent of all parties involved. And you'll see that consent of all parties involved is the pinnacle of the definitions there that is so similar. Um, a lot of people will have had non monogamous relationships at one point or another in their lifetime, but it's not always consensual. It's a lot of the time you see people doing cheating, and that is not the same thing as polyamory. Um, Polyamory is when multiple people agree that they are going to have relationships with each other outside of a didactic two-person monogamous relationship. It can be a polyfidelous triangle, triad. It can be um, someone agreeing to date many different people. It can be many different situations. Um, but generally, it is this consent to have intimate relationships. And it's not always sexual. It is sometimes not always romantic, even. There are asexual people who are polyamorous. So, what is the difference between polygamy and polyamory? So, polygamy is oftentimes referring to a very hierarchical structure that is between a heterosexual male and multiple heterosexual women that are just in relationship with this husband person. And that is very different in power dynamic, especially than a lot of polyamory. There is abusive scenarios that happen within polyamory. Don't get me wrong, they do happen, but it is not part of the inherent structure of how we teach polyamory. That belongs in our worldview. Um, so, what is polyamory not? Polyamory and swinging are different. You can be both a polyamorous person and a swinger. You can participate in the swinger lifestyle and as well as the polyamorous lifestyle. That's possible, but they're not necessarily the same thing. Swinging doesn't necessarily equal very serious emotional relationships outside of the physical relationships that happen within a club or a party or the bedroom. And polyamory, while I believe for me, it is an orientation. For me, polyamory is not a part of Pride or the LGBTQ plus, because polyamory is more of a relationship orientation, not a sexual orientation or gender orientation like LGBTQ plus. Um, I don't. I think you can be one and the same. You can be both polyamorous and belong to LGBTQ plus or Pride group, but just because you're polyamorous doesn't make you part of that necessarily. So, why do people get into polyamory? Well, I mentioned a little bit in the previous slide that some people think of it as an orientation, meaning they think of polyamory as something that is part of who they are, an essential part of their being, that they must act out to be true to themselves. Some people, though, only believe it's a lifestyle choice for them in the moment. That's how they're operating with their current relationships, and that works for them. They're consenting, they're probably consenting, but they don't necessarily need polyamory to feel like they are being true to who they are. Some reasons people want to feel different types of romance or different types of feelings, different types of relationships with different types of people. We can want different paths of growth and different paths of stimulation, where sometimes in the kinky world, for example, you might have a certain fetish that someone is not exactly into, but you can maybe have a different partner that shares your joy and passion for that, and will help you act that part out, as long as it's all consensual with everyone involved. And then also, like, polyamory really can allow you to have multiple avenues of care and support, which is really important to bringing the optimal love paradigm that you need to be the best you can be. You need support out there to help you grow into the best person you can be. And why not have multiple people? It's not for everyone. Not saying that poly is the lifestyle or orientation of everyone out there. It doesn't work for everyone. But so I have a little video here on what are some of the reasons that polyamory might be for you. This is from Psych2Go, and I love some of their stuff. They do some cute things.
by what we have learned in media. The tea is fed by a happily ever after. Our perception of what should and should not be is completely skewed by what we have learned in media. The typical pattern of intense passion and emotions, a conflict that makes us fight for that God-forsaken love, and then the resolution of being together forever. We see any romantic or sexual interests outside of that relationship as immoral, and that we must constrain ourselves for this one love for the rest of our lives. But is there such a thing as your one and only love? Is it not possible to love more than one soul? This question has resulted in cheating, divorce, resentment, conflicts, and a lot of lying. Is monogamy the only way to be in a loving relationship? More and more people are finding healthy relationships inside consensual, non-monogamous relationships. In actuality, the cultures that only accept monogamous relationships are in the minority worldwide. According to a paper in the Journal of Evolutionary Biology, 83% of societies allow polygamy. At Psych2Go, we're bringing you the 8 signs polyamory may be right for you. The first sign is that you have always felt limited and confined in conventional relationships. It's not the person you're with that's making you feel confined, it's the situation. Have you ever felt like you're no longer acting as an individual, but always thinking about being faithful to your partner? And you can't help but think, does this come from a place of love, freedom, and security? Or does it come from a place of ownership, jealousy, and fear? Sign number 2 is that you learn so much about yourself through others. Relationships are fun, yes, but they are also incredible opportunities to learn and explore different aspects of yourself. Each person is a universe, and both negative and positive experiences that we venture in with them are a journey to learning and growing individually as a person. If you are limited to only one relationship, there may be aspects of yourself you are neglecting. Sign number 3 is that you are the kind of person who feels energized by other people. Does diving into experiences with people outside of your primary relationship nurture, energize, and refresh you? Do you feel energized and refreshed after you have an innocent yet perhaps a little flirtatious coffee with someone from the opposite sex whilst in a relationship? This does not have to imply any physical engagement. An innocent lunch date is enough. In a polyamorous relationship, you are free to flirt, have fun, and share your experiences with other people in any way you desire. Sign 4 is that you like to constantly challenge yourself in order to grow. The most common reason for people rejecting an open relationship is jealousy. They would rather not deal with the intensity of jealous feelings they would get with the very imagination of their partner engaging with someone else. But what if polyamory will teach you to be less jealous and to love with complete freedom? Would this not be like taking an entire weight off of your shoulders? This experience, while still being a very difficult one, will teach you to love someone. Fear, jealousy, and possession are not things that come from a place of love. Consider it a love boot camp. Sign number 5 is that communication and honesty are very important things for you. You can't stand lying about anything, and let's be honest, most people feel safer not admitting to their partners that they may be interested in or attracted to someone else. They may also not feel safe about telling their partner about certain friendships for fear of jealousy. You are the kind of person who would rather be open about these difficult topics and feel safe in approaching them with your partner. You think it's best and healthier to tackle the situation and finding a compromise that makes you both happy. If there is something forbidden to us, we will only want it more. If we feel free to be with somebody else, then the initial excitement of that forbidden fruit is gone. Sign number 6 is that you don't like living life by society's rules and tend to question everything. You are not one to follow social constructs of what should and should not be. You often find yourself questioning these impositions made on us. Polyamory is instantly rejected by society and almost seen as a threat to normal relationships and normal family life. However, you prefer to live an experience for yourself before deciding your opinion on something, as opposed to following everybody else like a sheep. Sign number 7 is that you trust your love and connection with this person more than anything. You don't think that seeing someone else could possibly take away from your love and devotion to your partner. If anything, it might even strengthen your appreciation for them. If the connection you have is authentic, then it is really hard for that to just go away with the introduction of someone new. Sometimes we just enjoy someone new in our lives, but that does not mean we want them to ever replace our partner. And finally, sign number 8 is that you are aware that we can love more than one person and feel attracted to more than one person. If we learn to accept that one person cannot fulfill every desire that we have, then we will immediately resent our partner less and appreciate them more. If we decide to allow ourselves and our partners to fulfill things we can't through someone else, we are making them happy, and that, my friend, is love. Thank you for watching this video, and hopefully these signs helped you see if you'd
And there was a lot of oversimplification in that, don't get me wrong. It's not that simple, and that XYZ all the time, even though we like to sometimes think the best of our situations. But it really can be a very fulfilling lifestyle when you engage in um, all the healthy behaviors that allow and empower everyone in your connected network to thrive.
We live in a world where the idea of love.
Okay. So, moving on to what is the different types of polyamory. So, here we have a lovely graphic that was created by Jessica Fern for her book Polysecure. And if you want a further in depth look at polyamory, a further in depth look at attachment theory and how they relate to each other, that is an amazing book. It is an amazing book, period. If you want any work on polyamory, um, you should really consider reading it. Um, and so in this graphic, she lines up a couple of the really more popular terms and labels that people use to label their polyamory style, based on low emotional exclusivity and low sexual exclusivity. So, looking at that emotional versus sexual angle, you see that in the high sexual exclusivity, you'll have people like poly intimates, or people who are monogamous, depending on how their emotional exclusivity ranges between their relationships. Um, so here you also see that, yes, you can have asexual and polyamorous people, people who have relationships that just don't have a sexual component, and they have multiple of those. And I actually have a partner that is asexual as well. And you see here hierarchical and versus non-hierarchical, and that's just to describe how you can have people have a preference for one relationship over all the others in their life, where there is a pecking order necessarily. And not to make it sound that harsh, sometimes it can still be very consensual. But I personally am not a fan of a strict hierarchical pattern. um, And then you have people who are more solo poly, meaning they put relationship more with themselves first. They don't have a primary relationship in their life. That is like what you would more think of in a traditional monogamous relationship. Um, and then you see relationship anarchy, all the way at the low emotional exclusivity and low sexual exclusivity. And relationship anarchy is a term that a lot of people use to capture a sense of no no rules, no restriction on freedoms for anyone involved. They're very big about personal choice and personal freedoms within relationships, and they focus a lot on that, how that empowers them a lot of the time. Um, Now, for like my style, for my concentric circle style, I have a middle to low emotional exclusivity, probably low emotional exclusivity, um, and low sexual. Um, so I might sit somewhere around the non-hierarchical polyamory um, level is where mine would probably sit the closest to. Um, let's see. Other types of polyamory would you might see terms pop up like kitchen table. The kitchen table is used to describe a sense of community within the polycule. So we use the term polycule to talk about the connection, the network of people. And kitchen table is a preference for people in that network to keep the conversation flowing and to keep relationships open and fluid between everyone in the involved. Um, some people don't like this because it can feel a little forced when you don't like your metamor, meaning someone that your partner is in a relationship with as well. And they don't like being forced to have a relationship with that metamor. Um, there's parallel poly as opposed to the kitchen table, which is a little more about like, okay, yeah, we're just going to groove along in our own little paths alongside each other, not really interacting, but we get along, okay, no friction. Parallel poly. Um, there's triads and quads. Some of those might fall in the polyfidelis track, not all of them, but some of them might have that fidelity angle as well. And then there's people that are polysaturated, meaning they just have so much going on in their lives, whether that's relationships or other things, that they just don't have time to add another relationship. They're not available anymore, even though they are polyamorous. So how the hell do people do this? This might sound like a lot. Like, what are all these things? People dating all these different people all over the place. What's going on here? And there's a lot involved, but I don't necessarily think it's anything that more involved, besides a little extra time scheduling, than a healthy monogamous relationship should have. A healthy monogamous relationship should have all these things that we're kind of going to talk about. Maybe they'd be a little more taken for granted in the beginning, that you some of these things, but they really should still be talked about, I think. And so number one thing is communication and honesty. We need to be honest about our feelings for other people as they developed. And when we figure out we want to ask someone out, tell our other partner, and hopefully they'll share in that joy. But then you need to move on to consent and asking, is it okay if I move forward? Is it okay if I tell you about what happens between me and so after our date? Or do you not really want to know the details? Is it not okay with so that you know the details of the things that we do? Maybe if they don't want me to talk about that secret fetish with you. And you need to figure out where the lines and boundaries are between the different people involved, and negotiate those things. So you're going to negotiate then what levels of involvement. Sometimes I'm not always that comfortable with negotiating what level of involvement with people is okay or not okay, because you can't always control what feelings develop and what feelings don't develop. Um, so I'm more about negotiating for physical safety, or some emotional safety, like STD testing, um, keeping people informed as soon as decisions are made, giving them the opportunity to give feedback. And generally agreeing to be compassionate with one each other, being and agreeing to love forward with one another, that you're not going to take all this as a sign that you're a failure in your relationship, that they want to be with someone else. And it's a very trusting place to be in sometimes. And you sometimes do have to go through some of the inner trauma you have about these things if you're going to have some healthy relationships. Again, monogamous or polyamorous. You want to go through those traumas that you have so you can be able to bring your full love forward into a relationship. Um, One of the ways that people allow themselves to have some healthy poly relationships are healthy boundaries, meaning they aren't too porous, but they aren't too rigid. You don't want to be closing yourself off from the world so much that you aren't affected by anything. You aren't able to let love into your life. But you don't want to have such porous boundaries that you're giving yourself to every single person that comes across your path and they don't really even deserve your attention. And for all of this, you do need a high level of self-awareness, a high level of emotional intelligence, I think. And you can get that in a lot of different ways. There's all sorts of great books out there. There's great therapists, great coaches, spiritual practices. There's ways to get that level of self-awareness outside of reading the poly books. But they really do help in reading all those poly literature books. And so the next part of this is jealousy. Jealousy is something pretty much everyone feels. I'm not a fan of how some poly people say they're like above jealousy, and I actually was one of those people for a while. I said like I feel envy once in a while, but I don't really feel jealousy, and I don't feel it often. But I understand a little more now that a lot of it was numbing and suppressing my trauma and not allowing myself to feel fully. And so jealousy is really something that all people get, and all, not just monogamous people get jealous of the stray glances or whatever, but we poly people get jealous as well. But it's not a failing, but it's an indicator. It allows us to open the door and realize something a little deeper. It's not something to beat out of you, like Marco is saying in here in this comic. It's going to give you some insight. And in this comic here, we say it's this cute little comic by Tigva Wolf. It says, Marco, if you get jealous, what hope do I have? Well, I don't think jealousy is a sign of moral failing, Marco says. Jealousy isn't something I need to beat out of me. It's just a part of me that wants to be heard. It says, hey, listen. And it's often a flag for something that needs to be addressed in my relationship, or within myself, or both. So if I'm having a lot of jealousy, I go into that hurting part of myself, gently give it a hug and ask it what it needs. And that can be a really good way of thinking of jealousy as that little green ucky monster that doesn't have to get so monstrous and ugly if you feed it the right things and you take care of it in the right way. So what's the solution? So you want to take that jealousy and be like, thank you for making me realize something's wrong. I'm having a feeling here. I need to realize what I'm feeling and understand it. Let's dig a little deeper and investigate. And then you want to co-regulate with your partners. It's okay to ask for a little support when you're feeling a little jealous. Don't blame your jealousy necessarily on your partners. It may not be their fault. It may be their fault, but it may not be their fault either. And when you're in the heat of the moment, you likely can't see which one it is. But it's okay to ask for some soothing from your partners when you're having these intense feelings. Um, you need to also self-regulate as well. Uh, Give yourself a nice bath, or cuddle your dog, or watch some silly videos on TikTok, or do something that's good for your soul. And then also you want to communicate all that with your partners and with your inner selves. So you can really have those conversations between your parts and your partners and understand where these feelings are coming from and address it. Because once you understand that jealousy is just this little awareness flag, like it's just a little this post-it note to let you know there's something going on underneath the hood, it's not as scary, and it takes a little bit of wind out of it as well. So what are some of the safe sex and emotional health practices that polyamorous people do? So a lot of us do get tested for STIs frequently. This is to make sure that everyone in our polycule is staying safe and healthy as possible. Um, but even if you're getting tested frequently, it's not a guarantee that you're still going to be negative every test you get. You have to use protection. You have to use condoms when possible, dental dams when possible. Um, you make your own choices when it comes to pleasure versus safety, and also emotional connection. Sometimes is people think that emotional connection is impacted by using barrier protection sometimes. You need to make your decisions, but you need to make them informed. So understand what the risks and what the recommendations are from various organizations when it comes to sexual health testing. So a lot of organizations will put out guidelines for MSM, or men who have sex with men. And those are like usually the strictest guidelines out there. And that's generally actually what I follow for my sexual health, because I don't think I'm actually at that high risk, but I'm usually getting tested every 6 months, unless, pandemic life and there's nothing new happening at all, that I'm not getting tested as often. But when there's new things happening, I like getting tested every 6 months, to make sure that things are not getting harbored in my body and I'm spreading it to the people I love and care about, because that would really suck and cause a lot of trust issues too. But in addition to getting tested and using protection, you need to discuss your sexual health practices, and your history with people. So knowing like, oh, I know one of my partners has HSV, or I know one of my partners used to have anonymous sex in bathhouses, or they still do have anonymous sex in bathhouses, even though they get tested every blah, blah, blah. You need to be honest about all these different practices with each other so you can make informed decisions. And also having this conversation builds trust and it builds consent. Um, you need to have the emotional health practice of talking about your goals for the relationship, your limits for relationships, like whether you have physical limitations, meaning like, oh, don't choke me, or don't pull my hair, or I really can't have you sleeping over my house in my bed. That's just not going to work for me. And if you have a limit or a boundary, be honest and forthwith about it. And no one's going to be able to respect it if you're not forthwith about it. Something that can really help people be emotionally safe and sexually safe is having a more open definition of sex. When I say sex, I am including oral sex. I am including anal sex. Sex is not just penis and vagina. It is much more than that. And when we just say penis and vagina is sex, we are severely underestimating our potential to transmit infections and catch feels too, I think. That's not how it works for everyone, but it's how it works for me. And if you have a more open definition of sex when you're having those discussions, then you're able to discuss a lot more thoroughly and a lot more safely. Um, and it's not just the discussions with your partners, but also the discussions with your providers. Um, a lot of healthcare providers don't understand the STD testing recommendations for polyamorous people. They just don't seem to get um, that we are at more risk and that we should be tested more often. But you do have to understand that that is something you should be doing for yourself. Alrighty. And and then lastly, and I don't think my slide is missing for this one, I was going to talk to you guys about how to find people in real life. um, so polyamory is something that might be a little more in the shadows because, if you do have multiple partners in a house, sometimes it can be illegal with your housing policies in your city, or it is illegal to have more than one spouse. But it might reflect badly on ethics clauses within um, the various workplaces you are with. And it can be a little dangerous, but there are ways to meet other polyamorous people. There's apps that do allow you to filter people by monogamy and non-monogamy, especially OkCupid. That's the one I've used on and off throughout the years. Field is another one. Um, you can also find Facebook groups that are more about education and memes and silly polyamory things. Um, if there's any resources for finding polyamory things you want to mention in the chat to share with the group, that's great. Um, and there are polyamorous people out there. Um, there there's statistics out there that say at least 60% of the population has been non-monogamous at one point in their life. And that's pretty high. um, but then there's also another one that says that it's only 5% of us are polyamorous presently. So drastic difference there. But if you have any ideas that have really helped you meet local polyamorous people, check it out. Suggest it. In addition to Facebook groups, FetLife events have been great in the past before the pandemic. Now that things are starting to come out a little more, we're going to have some classes in person. Yay. And we're going to be able to meet people and discuss things in person afterwards, which is going to be great. I'm looking forward to getting back in touch with the San Antonio community here where I am. And there are plenty of events. There were plenty of events listed on FetLife before, and now they're starting to slowly trickle in, and they'll be mentioned on other places as well, and you'll see them coming through. And and I seem to be missing another slide. And my other slide was wanted to talk a little bit about the myths of wanting to do polyamorous lifestyle. The myths that a lot of people have around our lifestyle is that we're dirty and we're diseased, and that's not true. Just like I talked about, so much of what I talked about was sexual health and STI testing. And some people say we're immoral, and that's not true. We talk about things a lot more than a lot of monogamous couples do, and trying to make sure we're on the same page sometimes more than those couples do. We discuss things and spend a lot of time processing with each other. And it fulfills us more in my world. And it's, not for everyone, but I think it offers lessons to everyone. Even if the lifestyle or orientation isn't for you, it can offer you some lessons, I think, on how to better have your relationships function. Um, so that is pretty much all I have today for the class portion of tonight. But if you really would like to support my cost of education for my sex therapy training, you are welcome to drop a tip or a suggested donation of $10. Please follow me on Instagram, or you can follow me on FetLife and Miss Cass. Um, or in my link tree, you can find the other classes I've given. I post my recordings on YouTube most of the time. Um, and I would love to have you guys reach out if you have any questions. But now I'm going to close the class, and I am going to open the floor for discussion and questions. And thank you guys so much for watching today. I really appreciate it.